This is a response video to Don Lemon, and I don't typically do this, particularly when it's against another brother who has the same goals as me to uplift humanity through uplifting black people. But recently, Don Lemon offered America and the world a quick fix list towards solving black America's problems. And I was very offended by the list for two reasons specifically. There were many black people who expressed a disappointment and opposition to his list. But Don never looked at himself or looked inwardly and said, perhaps there's some merit to this. Perhaps I was cold. Perhaps I could have done something better. Perhaps my logic was flawed. Perhaps these thousands and thousands of people may know what they're talking about. Rather, he just said, no, I'm right, and kept getting people to agree with him, who agreed with him to be on his shows. Secondly, he used Bill O'Reilly. That's like using the Klan. That's offensive to me. His quick fix list was 5 items, action items, that he thought black people should think about if they want to change the black community. Number 5 on the list was pull up your pants. And he said that sagging was from prison culture, and that it somehow signified the role a male would play in homosexual sex in prison. Okay, all right. I don't know if that's true. It may or may not be true, but so what? These kids aren't doing that for that. Sagging is a trend, and we're in our 40s, so we may not like it, and I think it's stupid, but it's a trend nonetheless, and it's not responsible for 20% of the woes in the black community. And there are some pretty high-achieving black people and whites, but black people in particular, who sag. Millionaires, teachers, scholars. There are some freaking mass murderers and some serial killers and some crooked judges and some lying pastors who wear $1,000 suits. So how is sagging responsible for such a profound part of the problems of black America? Next, he talked about the N-word. That's offended me too. The N-word. I mean, my family is split down the middle on the N-word. My partner, he's a professor. He thinks it's a bad thing and we should never say it. Me, on the other hand, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. It was very racist. I was born in the 70s. I've been spat upon. I've been called ugly names by white people. And when I was young and didn't have anyone guiding me, I took it very personally, and it was a serious confidence shatterer. Here I was in the 70s and 80s with my head down, afraid to look at white people because I didn't want them to call me nigger. And so like Jay-Z, like Chris Rock, and some of the others interviewed, I do believe that I take the power away from the word nigger by not using it as such a taboo. My son is an athlete. He's a sports fanatic, and recently a Philadelphia Eagles player said nigger, and that didn't impact my son as much as it could have, because I let my son know, yo, I don't care who calls you nigger. That word means nothing. Who are you? Who are you? Whoever is calling you a nigger, they're the nigger. So that is important to me. And secondly, Paula Deen. My mother, myself, my partner, we all like Paula Deen fans. Yo, butter, cake, cookies, donuts. Nigger. It could have been impactful and hurt us, like it hurt so many other people who are on Facebook shaking my head. I can't believe it. I can believe it. And it's not that big a deal to me. You can call me nigger all day. It means nothing to me. The next thing Don talked about was school. He said that we should stop telling people they're acting white when they do well in school, when they want to finish school. And you should finish school and learn to speak proper English. Well, I have a degree in communications like Don, and proper English is the English that best enables you to communicate your message to your intended audience. So when Jay-Z is on a stage saying what he's saying, it's proper English. Even if it isn't standard English, it's still proper because the message comes across. But Don, if you use standard English and people don't get your message, then what good is it? The next thing the other thing about school, I wanted to go back to that. School, to talk about school and not to talk about the racism that school was built on and how curriculum does not consider black culture and how social studies books and history books have mere pages on the tragedy of slavery and who black people are in this country. We all know the same black heroes, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, now Malcolm X, and a few. But there's so many more, but our children don't learn about that. So their school books reflect images of people who are not them. And then we have kids who drop out of school to help their parents because their parents don't have any money. We have kids who have learning disabilities who just don't do well in school. We have kids who get bullied. All of these kids leave school. Some kids leave for the fun of it. Yo, I want to bounce. I want to go have fun. I want to do drugs, whatever. But not all of them. And I just thought that your comment was short-sighted. Next was the neighborhood thing. Respect where you live. I completely agree with you, 100%. But you lost me, Don, when you did the whole little. I've lived in many predominantly white neighborhoods, and I rarely, if ever, have seen anyone litter. Um, what kind of white neighborhoods did you live in? Because if you come to Baltimore, brother, I'm gonna take you to somewhere. Not only will some white people throw trash, they will steal your money out your pocket while you're walking in. Because we got white thugs in Baltimore. Word. So it just offended me that you made a blanket statement about black people and white people, because you then said, now that I live in Harlem, a historically black neighborhood, I see adults and children, black, who opt to throw things on the ground rather than in a trash that's a few feet away from them, a trash can that's a few feet away from them. Well, I know black neighborhoods that are poor and incredibly clean. I used to live in one, right in the projects. No, for real. The last thing Don said was, stop having children out of wedlock. Well, I'm the product of a child out of wedlock, and my mom actually got a boyfriend when I was 9, and they stayed together until I was 23 without being married. So, you know, I was in a loving home even though they weren't married. And I had kids in my neighborhood who were in married homes, but their dad was kicking their mom's ass, or both parents were using drugs, or they were great parents, or they were stealing, or I mean, there is anything, but one doesn't mean that that's not the big problem in the black community. The big problem in the black community is the problem that was put on us, and that you never address that. What should white people do? What should white people who don't hire black people because they're black do? What should white police officers who frisk and stop and search black boys because they're black, what should they do? What should white teachers who hate black children or just can't identify with them, what should they do when they're being paid to be in classrooms and teach these children, but they can't reach them, so rather they suspend them over and over again because they don't understand their culture, never ever having walked in their neighborhoods? What should those people do, Don? How do you talk about this stuff without talking about that? Lastly, you said in a subsequent video, what's wrong with telling people that they should dress appropriately? Well, that's presumptuous, because what is appropriate? Appropriate is relative. Addressing appropriate does not mean wearing a shirt and tie, and it doesn't mean not sagging. It means doing what works for the situation that you're in. And Don Lemon, you don't know all situations. I know that you had good intentions, Don, but what you did was very damaging to black people, and you should apologize.